This is the story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down. Full disclosure, when I was growing up, I loved some Will Smith. Fresh Prince. That was a great show. This past Sunday night, I don't know what I was doing, but I can tell you what I wasn't doing. I was not watching the Oscars until I got on the internet on my phone and I saw something happen. I saw Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. I thought to myself, after sending it out to a few people, I thought to myself, did that really just happen? Is that real? How many of you saw that? Anybody, most of us have seen that confrontation now that that's happened, probably more times than you care to admit, right? Let's take a quick poll. How many of you think that was a real slap? Raise your hand. How many of you think it was real? How many of you think it was staged, was fake? All right, we're about 60-40 real, fake. So, okay, all right. Next question. Assuming it was real, how many of you feel like Will Smith was justified in doing what he did? Raise your hand. A few of us. How many of you said, no, he went way too far? Yep, a few more, It's interesting to see how different folks have responded to this confrontation. And I'll admit that upon first seeing it, I thought to myself, and not knowing anything else about the situation, I thought to myself, wow, that was pretty heroic on his part to do that. Stand up for his wife, right? But then I learned a little bit more about the situation. I'll share that with you later on. And I've changed my view on that. Folks, understand this. Confrontation is a necessary and a needed part of life. Unfortunately, though, when we think about confrontation, we think about episodes like what we saw happen last Sunday night at the Oscars. And for most of us, when we think about confrontation or confrontational situations, we try to avoid those things like the plague, don't we? We don't want anything to do with them. But here's the problem with that. If you avoid needed and necessary conflict and confrontation to keep the peace, you will start a war within your inner self. Think about it. It just tears you up inside. We've all been there before, right? A hard conversation that we know we need to have with somebody, but we avoid it. And it tears us up inside over and over and over again. We keep telling ourselves lies that it'll change, it'll be different, but it doesn't. And we know in the back of our mind, we need to have the conversation. Understand this, folks. We cannot change what we refuse to confront. We can't change it. Confrontation is difficult, but it's biblical, believe it or not. And it's one of the most powerful things that we need to use and be a part of. If we're going to really build this bridge and get across this bridge in the journey of our life as we walk and move toward the abundant life and the full life that God has for us as believers. Jesus sets out a plan for us to resolve conflict and to confront people in Scripture. In Matthew 18, I want to read that with you today. Some of you already know this, but it's probably a good idea just to remind yourself of how we go about dealing with conflict, how we go about confronting people. Look at what it says in Matthew 18:15. If another believer sins against you, go on Facebook and point it out. If another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses that you have won that person back, but if you are unsuccessful, take one or two others with you and go back again, so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. Verse 17, if the person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. Then if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. That's how believers deal with confrontation and conflict with other believers. This is conflict resolution laid out for us within the church. Folks, first off, the Oscars are the furthest thing from the church, okay? Secondly, this definitely isn't what we saw played out on TV Sunday night. We're going to go back and look at one of the most dysfunctional families in the Bible. We looked at them a few weeks ago. It's the family of Jacob. And you want to talk about dysfunction? Man, it's in this family. But yet, God used this lineage to bring about Jesus. So if you have dysfunction in your family, it's going to be all right. God can still use you. God can still do great things through your lineage. But all of us have difficult situations in our family. If you know anything about Jacob, you know that Jacob kind of tricked his brother Esau, took his blessing and stole his birthright, and he flees off to another place to find a wife, and he goes to a guy by the name of Laban, who is actually his mother's brother. And Laban had a daughter named Rachel, and Jacob was madly in love with Rachel. And he made a deal with Laban that if he would work 7 years, then Laban would give to Jacob his daughter Rachel. And Jacob agrees, so that's nothing. I'll work 7 years to have her as my wife. But on the night when Laban would give Rachel to Jacob, he tricks Jacob with the help of some alcohol and gives him his other daughter, Leah, instead. Jacob, frustrated, of course, and angry, agrees again to work another 7 years for Laban in exchange for Rachel. So he has 2 wives now. Later, after probably more difficult situations, Jacob decides, I've had enough. I'm ready to leave this place. I fulfilled my duties to Laban. I'm ready to take my wives and my children and start fresh. I want to go back toward my homeland. And so he begins to break away from Laban. And see, because Jacob was God's man, God had brought favor upon Laban. And his flocks were full. God used Jacob. Jacob tried to make a deal with Laban. Hey, listen, I'm ready to go. Let's make a deal where I get part of the flock and you keep part of the flock, right? I think I deserve that. And Laban agrees, kind of reluctantly, to a deal, but actually ends up cheating Jacob out of what was rightfully his in the deal. So Jacob, no stranger to tricking people, pulls one over on him and gets part of the flock and takes his wife and takes his children, and they flee away from Laban before Laban knows. Jacob finally has enough and leaves Laban, heading back toward the homeland. Laban finds out. A couple days later, he catches up with Jacob. And here we have one of the first confrontations in Scripture. A tense confrontation. And I want us to read what happened. Genesis 31, verse 36 is where we're going to start today. Upon meeting up together now, Jacob became very angry and he challenged Laban. He challenged Laban. Or you could say he confronted Laban with all these things. Folks, understand this. Anger is an emotion created by God. And understand this. It's a good thing because God created it. Jesus, believe it or not, got angry whenever he was here with us on the earth. He was constantly angry at religious leaders. He was angry when he walked in the temple and folks had set up all this stuff and was blocking access into the temple for those Gentiles, for other people to come and be with him and approach God. Jesus got angry, and yet he did not sin. But so often, people let anger and rage control them. In Houston, we have a problem. Ephesians 4:26 says, and don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you are still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. This is what happens when someone has hurt us or someone has wounded us. Understand, when somebody has hurt you that way, folks, there will be a release of some sort. And it can either be a controlled release or an uncontrolled release. But eventually, there will be a release when somebody hurts you, when somebody wounds you. Bullying happens because a wounded person that didn't, well, probably didn't do anything to deserve what happened to them either, but they're wounded, and then they in turn go and make someone else, an innocent party, feel their pain. That's what bullying is. And that's really what happened, if you think about it, with Will Smith on Sunday night. He was triggered when a man said something about his wife, and uncontrolled rage and uncontrolled anger spilled out of him. And someone who was just doing his job, who was basically harmless and innocent, got hurt in the process. And now Will Smith's life is completely turned upside down. And in the process, he proved himself to be a narcissist. What's that mean? The definition of a narcissist, guys, I would just say is this. It's someone who wants to confront others about their stuff, but not themselves. The narcissist refuses to look inward and confront themselves with the truth. The sad reality of Will Smith's situation is that he is somewhat reluctantly in what they call an open marriage. An open marriage. His wife, who was made fun of, and I'm not endorsing that. His wife, who was made fun of, it's publicly acknowledged that she is having relations with another man. That's a fact. And as much as our culture wants to act like that's okay, I promise you, to be on the other side of the open relationship is excruciating. And it's painful. And it's a wound. And it hurts. Will Smith was triggered when Chris Rock made a comment about his wife. Something was built up inside of them. He had to prove to himself and maybe to everyone else that he was a real man. Because he has already had all of his self-worth and value taken from him from his wife because of an open relationship. Let me ask you, what are the things that you're triggered by? What are your triggers? Can I tell you that triggers don't do a whole lot? I know a little bit about shooting guns. Triggers don't do a whole lot if there's not any ammo in the gun, right? There's got to be ammo in the gun. Otherwise, a trigger don't do anything. What's the ammunition in your gun? What's the thing that would cause you to pull the trigger? What's the wound? What's the hurt? What's the affliction that you haven't dealt with yet, that you haven't been set free from yet, that causes you to be triggered all the time, that causes you to let the anger and the rage come out and wound and hurt other people? See, Jacob, we're going to see in a second, manages to release his anger in a way that ultimately brings about peace and brings about healing instead of more harm and hurt. That's what we're after, guys. Confrontation that brings about healing, not hurt. Let's read the story in Genesis 31, starting in verse 36. And Jacob became very angry, and he challenged Laban. What's my crime, he demanded. What have I done wrong to make you chase after me as though I were a criminal? You have rummaged through everything I own. Now show me what you found that belongs to you. Set it out here in front of us before our relatives for all to see. Let them judge between us. This is Laban talking. And here's Jacob. For 20 years I have been with you, caring for your flocks. In all that time, your sheep and goats never miscarried. In all those years, I never used a single ram of yours for food. If any were attacked and killed by wild animals, I never showed you the carcass and asked you to reduce the count of your flock. I did you right. No, I took the loss myself. You made me pay for every stolen animal, whether it was taken in broad daylight or in the dark of night. Verse 40, Jacob says, Laban, I worked for you through the scorching heat of the day and through cold and sleepless nights. Yes, for 20 years I slaved in your house. I worked 14 years earning your $2 and then 6 more years for your flock. And you changed my wages 10 times. In fact, if the God of my father had not been on my side, the God of Abraham, the fearsome God of Isaac, you would have sent me away empty-handed. Wow. Confrontation. Confrontation isn't always possible in person like it was in this situation. And can I tell you this, even though it would be great in some ways to be able to confront somebody in person, it is not a necessity to be set free. It is not a necessity for the healing that you need in your life. You don't have to confront somebody in person to receive that, to get that. So we've got another option for you. And I've encouraged you these last few weeks about the power of using the pen, the power of writing. If there's a person who's wounded you, who's hurt you, you need to confront that person. You probably don't need to do it in person. Maybe you can't. Maybe they passed away a long time ago. The way you do that is by writing a letter of confrontation to them. Write a letter to them. Write your thoughts out. This is the release you need of the buildup in your inner self. The letter is not for them to read. They probably will never see it. They don't need to see it. It's for you to release and for you to say out loud. Write letters confronting the offenders in your life. Normally, the very first people you want to write to are your parents, your mother and father. And this isn't saying that you had a bad mom or a bad dad or anything like that, but there is a real thing called the father wound. And in case you don't know it, no human is perfect. No human can fully give to you what you need as a person. And so mothers and fathers will wound you without even knowing it. You could have had the best mother, the best father, but there are still things inside of you that you need to deal with, wounds from your childhood. The very first offender you write to are your mother and your father. Then past that, you can write to other folks that have hurt you and wounded you. This is the release that you need. Let it all out. If you were abused, if you were abandoned, if you were lied to, if you were not protected, if you were talked down to, if you were not disciplined or not listened to, whatever wounds you've experienced, write that down in a letter of confrontation. And then eventually, the next step will be for you to read that out loud to a trusted counselor, maybe a pastor, or even a trusted friend. Write it out loud and just close it. Read it out loud. Confrontation is important. Confrontation is necessary for you to get over the hump, to get over the hill, to cross the bridge. Genesis 31:42. Look at what Jacob says, and he continues his dialogue here with Laban. It says this, but God has seen your abuse and my hard work, Laban. He's seen it. That's why he appeared to you last night and rebuked you. See, one thing, folks, that we can admire about Jacob is this. He trusted God enough that God would be the one to dish out the vengeance on the person that wounded him, that hurt him. Not taking matters into his own hands and seeking out revenge himself. I know all of us, there's moments where we want revenge. Will Smith in that moment said, I want revenge. I want to get him. And you know, for a few moments, that kind of feels good. When you start thinking about, you know what? That didn't satisfy anything. Now I'm hurt and they're hurt, and it's not any better on me. Proverbs 20:22 says this. Don't say I will get even for this wrong. Wait for the Lord to handle the matter. Wait for the Lord to handle the matter. But listen, It's okay to desire vindication. We all want to be vindicated. That's key in your bridge building. You need to hear someone else say to you in regards to your struggle, your challenge, yes, that was traumatic. Yes, that was hard. Yes, that was difficult. Yes, that person should not have done that to you. That's why it is important as you write the letter of confrontation to your father, to your mother, to the offender, that you read it out loud to somebody else who can talk to you about that. And they will agree with you. That was a struggle in your life. That wasn't easy for you to overcome. That was a challenge for you. And it was difficult. Jacob, we're going to see, has the benefit of finding peace with his father-in-law, Laban, because of the confrontation. And there's a happy ending. But we know that's not always the case. Look at Genesis 31. Verse 43. Then Laban replied to Jacob after Jacob confronts him about all the wrongs he had done to him. Laban said, these women are my daughters. These children are my grandchildren. And these flocks are my flocks. In fact, everything you see is mine. But what can I do now about my daughters and their children? Verse 44. So come, let's make a covenant. Let's make a treaty. Let's make peace, you and I. And it'll be a witness to our commitment. Confrontation, necessary, has to happen for peace to come. We don't hear anything else about the relationship between Laban and Jacob. I have no idea if they ever even saw each other again. They got along after that point. But what we do know is that Jacob was able to move forward and leave that situation behind. That monkey was off his back. It was no longer affecting him every single day. He didn't have to worry about that anymore. It was done and it was over with. Let's talk about peace. What is peace? What's peace? Do we know what peace is? Do we have peace anywhere around us in this world that we live in this culture that we live in? It seems like everywhere we look, people are fighting right now, right? We look across the seas and we see what's going on in Russia or in Ukraine with Russia. We look at our national government, we see fighting. We look at our local government, we see fighting. We look at social media, we see fighting. We see unhinged and uncontrolled anger and rage everywhere. Matter of fact, it seems to be the norm. But I'm reminded about what God says. And the Bible makes some very poignant comments about peace. Matthew 5:9, the word says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Romans 12:18 says, if it possible, so far as it depends upon you, which is a lot, live peaceably with all. You know what that means? Ignore what they say on Facebook. Handle things in person. Use your voice. Use your mouth. Do you know how much drama and trauma and just junk is stirred up because of text messages and social media? Typing back and forth and talking. If we would just come together and look at each other in the face, eye to eye, we wouldn't have the conflict. We wouldn't have the rage. And listen, not everybody on social media obviously are believers in God. But I ain't talking to them. I'm talking to y'all. Okay? If you say that you're a believer in Christ, you don't be a part of that junk. I'm not saying you can't be upset, you can't be angry, but there's a right way and a wrong way to deal with it. As much as it depends upon you, what? Say it out loud. Live peaceably with all. Why? Colossians 3:15, the last verse we have today. Paul tells us that we should let the peace of Christ rule in our hearts, to which we were indeed called in one body, and be thankful. In order for us to have peace in our life, so we bow our head and close our eyes. You guys will bring the lights down. In order for us to have peace with God, that only happens whenever we are at peace with others. We can't be at peace with God and not be at peace with others. And further, you can't find any source of peace in this world outside of Jesus. If you don't believe in Jesus, if you don't call him Savior, if you don't call him Lord, every other version of peace is fleeting. But this God that I believe in, he's the real deal. And he'll never leave. He'll never forsake you. He never changes. And he always loves you. That's where I get the peace from. And this morning, there's an opportunity for you. If you've never made the choice to trust Jesus Christ with your life, you don't have true peace in your life. You will never find it apart from Jesus and believing on Jesus. This morning, would you say to the Lord, as we have our heads bowed and our eyes closed, God, I've never fully trusted in you. And today, for the first time, I want you in my life. Come into my life, Jesus. Take up residence, make a home in my heart. I need you. I need the fresh start. I need the second chance. I need the abundant life. I want it, God. Be the bridge for me. We believe here at Church in the Country, if you will say that to him, if you will say that in your heart this morning, there's nothing special about those words, but he will come into your life and change you and make you into a new person. For the rest of us, as we think about and we deal with situations in our life, hard situations, things that have hurt us, anger that's inside of us, I pray that we would deal with those things appropriately. That our conduct would represent the conduct of Christ. And that for us personally, we would not let things that have built up over the years and over times get so full inside of us that we just explode out of anger and rage onto everybody else around us and wound us and hurt us. Would you help us, God, to deal with those things? God, would you set us free this morning as we sing about the goodness of God? Would you stand with us now?